Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the kind of history that makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about glory and sport. Imagine yourself not as a spectator sipping a sugary drink in a plush stadium seat, but as a hopeful athlete, calloused and sunbaked, trudging through the parched, dusty plains of ancient Greece. The air is thick with the smell of sweat unwashed bodies and the distant murmur of thousands gathering. You can feel the hot sun beating down a relentless hammer on your bare shoulders as you join the throngs heading towards Olympia. It's a pilgrimage, yes, but not the serene kind. This is a journey fraught with peril where the promise of eternal fame hangs precariously beside the very real threat of agonizing pain disfigurement, or worse. You might not survive the journey, let alone the games themselves. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're approaching the sacred site of Olympia, a place etched into the annals of history as the birthplace of the Olympic Games. But this isn't the sparkling, sanitized spectacle you see on your screens every 4 years. Oh no. This is a raw, untamed beast steeped in rituals that would make your modern sensibilities squirm. The very air vibrates with a tension that's part religious fervor, part primal aggression. You can smell the wood smoke from countless fires, the earthy scent of the olive groves, and something else. A metallic tang that you quickly realize is the lingering odor of animal sacrifice. The sheer scale of it hits you first. Thousands upon thousands of people from every corner of the Greek world are converging here. There are wealthy aristocrats with their retinues, humble farmers hoping to catch a glimpse of greatness, merchants hawking their wares, and of course the athletes themselves, their bodies honed to a terrifying peak. You walk through the Altis, the sacred grove where ancient olive trees stand as silent witnesses to centuries of competition. It's a place of reverence, yes, but also a place of immense practicalities. There are makeshift stalls selling food, water, and whatever meager comforts can be found. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, dusty, and well-trodden, a testament to the countless feet that have passed this way before. As you move deeper, you start to see the evidence of the religious aspect. Altars, some simple stone blocks, others more elaborate, dot the landscape. Smoke curls lazily upwards from some of them, carrying the scent of burning offerings to the gods. You understand instinctively that these games are not just about athletic prowess. They are a deeply spiritual act, a way for mortals to honor and appease the mighty Olympians. And in ancient Greece, appeasing the gods was a matter of life and death, success or ruin. The sheer logistics of hosting such an event in an era without modern infrastructure are staggering. Imagine thousands of people living in temporary encampments with limited sanitation. The heat is oppressive, the flies are abundant, and the risk of disease is constant. Yet people flock here driven by a desire for glory, a hope for divine favor, and perhaps a simple need for entertainment in a life that was often harsh and unforgiving. You overhear snippets of conversations in various Greek dialects, the excited chatter about favorite athletes, the hushed whispers about potential omens, and the boisterous arguments about who will win the next race. It's a vibrant, chaotic tapestry of humanity, all focused on one central event. As you get closer to the stadium, the noise level swells. A roar, deep and guttural, washes over you, followed by cheers that seem to shake the very ground. You push your way through the throng, eager to get a better look. The stadium itself is remarkably simple by modern standards. No elaborate seating, no massive video screens, just a long, flat track of packed earth surrounded by grassy banks where spectators perch. There are no seats with cushions, no luxury boxes. If you want to see you stand, you jostle, you endure the sun. The ancient Greeks were not big on comfort when it came to their athletic events. This was about endurance not just for the athletes, but for the spectators too. You realize that the disturbing secrets aren't just hidden in obscure texts. They're woven into the very fabric of this place. The relentless sun, the lack of hygiene, the sheer physical toll on everyone involved. It's all part of the unvarnished reality. There's a subtle undertone of brutality even in the everyday aspects of the games. You see the strong, silent types, clearly athletes, their bodies taut with muscle, their gazes fixed and intense. You also see the less fortunate, the disabled, the elderly struggling to keep up with the pace, yet determined to be part of this momentous occasion. The social hierarchy is palpable. The wealthy have better vantage points, perhaps even some shade, while the majority bake in the open sun. One of the most immediate, disturbing secrets you encounter is the sheer, undeniable nakedness of it all. As you get closer to the training grounds or the stadium itself, you see athletes completely unclad, glistening with oil and sweat. This wasn't just a cultural norm, it was a deeply ingrained aspect of the games. The word gymnasium itself comes from the Greek word gymnos, meaning naked. For the ancient Greeks, the naked body was a celebration of divine perfection, a testament to physical excellence. But for you, a person of the modern era, it's initially disorienting, even a little shocking. You try to avert your gaze, then realize it's futile. This is how it is. And you start to wonder about the practicalities, the discomfort, the sheer vulnerability of it. Imagine running a marathon completely naked under the scorching sun with thousands of eyes upon you. It certainly adds a layer of raw, unfiltered truth to the concept of athletic achievement. You can almost feel the chafing, can't you? Beyond the nakedness, you begin to grasp the sheer violence inherent in many of the events. This isn't just about graceful sprints or elegant discus throws. Boxing, wrestling, and the pancration, a brutal mix of both, were central to the games. In these contests, rules were minimal, and the objective was often to incapacitate your opponent. You see the scars on the athletes' faces, the gnarled hands, the broken noses. These are not merely superficial injuries, they are badges of honor earned through immense pain and endurance. The sound of a punch landing, a bone crunching, or a body hitting the ground is not uncommon. The crowd roars its approval, seemingly unfazed by the brutality. For them, it's part of the spectacle, a demonstration of strength and courage. You hear stories whispered amongst the crowd of athletes dying during competition. Not just from accidents, but from exhaustion, from blows sustained, or from the sheer strain on their bodies. The stakes were incredibly high. Victory meant eternal glory, a lifetime of prestige, and often significant financial rewards. Defeat, on the other hand, meant shame, obscurity, and a return to the anonymity of everyday life. This immense pressure pushed athletes to their absolute limits, sometimes beyond them. There was no medical team on standby, no immediate care for grievous injuries. If you fell, you were largely on your own or dependent on the goodwill of fellow competitors or spectators. The training itself was relentless and unforgiving. Athletes would dedicate years of their lives, often in isolation, to perfecting their craft. Their diets were strict, their exercises brutal. They would often train with heavy weights, run for miles in the heat, and practice their fighting techniques until their bodies screamed for rest. You hear tales of athletes consuming strange concoctions believed to enhance their performance, from herbs and mushrooms to even more bizarre substances. The line between natural training and early forms of doping was blurry, and the drive to win was paramount. It makes you wonder what kind of energy drink they'd have come up with if they had the internet. One of the less talked about aspects, yet a critical one, is the social exclusion inherent in the games. Only freeborn Greek men were allowed to compete. Women were strictly forbidden, even as spectators, under penalty of death. Slaves, foreigners, and those deemed unfit were also excluded. This wasn't a universal celebration of athleticism. It was a carefully curated display of Greek male excellence. You see groups of women kept at a distance, perhaps catching glimpses from afar or simply waiting patiently for their male relatives to return. The penalty for a woman caught inside the stadium during the games was to be thrown from the Typeian cliff, a grim reminder of the rigid social norms that governed ancient Greek society. The very fact that such a draconian law existed underscores the deep-seated anxieties and patriarchal structures of the time. The religious significance of the games also carried its own dark undertones. Animal sacrifices were a common occurrence, with hundreds of oxen slaughtered in honor of Zeus. The air would be thick with the smell of burning flesh and blood, a constant reminder of the gods' power and the need for their favor. While these were considered sacred acts, the sheer volume of the sacrifices and the messy, visceral nature of them would certainly be unsettling to modern eyes. The fat from the sacrificed animals was often burned as an offering, creating a smoky haze that hung over the sacred precinct. This was not a clean antiseptic affair. It was a primal, earthy, and sometimes gruesome display of devotion. Another unsettling detail is the practice of oath-taking. Before the games began, athletes and their trainers would gather before a statue of Zeus Horkios, the oath-taking Zeus. Here they would swear solemn oaths that they had trained fairly, would compete fairly, and would not cheat. The penalty for breaking this oath was not just divine wrath, but also public shaming, and a hefty fine which was used to erect bronze statues of Zeus known as Zanes along the pathway leading to the stadium. Each Zane statue would bear an inscription detailing the name of the cheater and their transgression, a permanent monument to their disgrace. Imagine the fear of not just losing, but losing your reputation, your honor, and having your name publicly branded as a cheat for all eternity. It was a powerful deterrent, but one that also reveals the constant temptation to bend or break the rules for the sake of victory. Academics still debate whether the sheer public humiliation of the Zanes was a more effective deterrent than any physical punishment. You realize that for all the glory and pageantry, the ancient Olympics were deeply rooted in a world that was far more brutal, superstitious, and hierarchical than your own. The pristine image of noble athletes competing for honor is a romanticized one. The reality was grittier, bloodier, and far more complex. The secrets of the ancient Olympics aren't just obscure historical facts. They're uncomfortable truths that force you to confront the darker side of human ambition and the lengths to which people will go for power, prestige, and survival. You can almost hear the whispered prayers, the strained grunts of effort, and the triumphant roars of the crowd all echoing through the vast emptiness of time. The sun begins to dip lower, casting long shadows across the ancient stones, and you are left with a profound sense of awe tinged with a shiver of unease. You're still there, right? Feeling that relentless sun, the dust on your skin, the distant echoes of shouts and cheers. You've seen the nakedness felt, the raw energy, but now let's peel back another layer and venture into the truly brutal world of ancient Olympic training. Forget your modern gyms with their air conditioning and ergonomic machines. This was a realm where the body was pushed to its absolute breaking point, not for comfort, but for survival and the elusive taste of victory. Imagine yourself as one of these aspiring athletes. You're not just training for a race, you're training for a way of life and identity. From a young age, if you were deemed promising, your life would revolve entirely around physical conditioning. Your days would be meticulously planned, dominated by exercise, strict diets, and a near-religious devotion to physical perfection. This wasn't a hobby, it was an all-consuming vocation. Your training regimen would have been under the watchful eye of a gymnast, a highly experienced trainer. These individuals were not just coaches, they were mentors, disciplinarians, and almost spiritual guides. They understood the human body in ways that seem incredibly advanced for their time, though often mixed with folk wisdom and superstitious beliefs. They'd prescribe specific exercises based on your body type and the event you were training for. For a runner, endless hours would be spent pounding the dusty tracks building stamina and speed. For a wrestler or boxer, it would be about developing raw power technique and an almost inhuman tolerance for pain. Let's talk about those exercises. There were no barbells or fancy weight machines. Instead, you'd be lifting heavy stones, carrying logs, or wrestling with other athletes sometimes for hours on end. Imagine holding large rocks aloft, performing squats, or throwing heavy discs repeatedly until your muscles screamed in protest. These were not about isolated muscle groups. They were about developing holistic functional strength. You'd practice long jumps with weights in your hands, learn to throw the discus with precision, and perfect the javelin's trajectory. Every movement was designed to mimic the demands of the actual competition, often with added resistance to build strength and endurance. For the combat athletes, the boxers, wrestlers, and especially the practitioners of the pancration, the training was even more unforgiving. The pancration, remember, was a no-holds-barred fight with only two rules: no biting and no eye gouging. Though historians still debate how strictly those two rules were actually enforced in the heat of battle. Imagine sparring sessions that were essentially full-contact brawls where you were expected to endure bone-jarring blows, choking holds, and joint locks. The goal wasn't just to win the sparring match, but to develop an unbreakable will and a complete disregard for pain. You learn to fall without breaking, to absorb punches, and to find the weakness in your opponent's stance. Broken noses, dislocated fingers, and bruised ribs were common daily occurrences. These weren't injuries to be nursed, they were simply part of the process, a testament to your commitment. Your diet, too, would have been severely controlled. Forget the rich, varied meals you might enjoy today. An ancient Olympic athlete's diet was practical and often monotonous, focusing on protein and sustenance. You'd consume large quantities of meat, likely beef, pork, or goat, along with cheese, figs, and other dried fruits for energy. Bread made from coarse grains would be a staple. Vegetables were less prominent as the focus was on dense, energy-rich foods to fuel the intense training. Water was of course essential, but hydration strategies were rudimentary at best. You'd drink when you were thirsty and hope it was enough to stave off the crushing effects of dehydration in the scorching Greek sun. There's a fascinating and somewhat disturbing detail about the training process, the concept of fattening up. Some athletes, particularly those in the combat sports, would undergo a period of intense overeating designed to pack on weight and muscle, often followed by a rapid drying out phase before competition. This early form of weight manipulation involved consuming vast quantities of food far beyond what might seem healthy to gain bulk and power. It sounds like a modern bodybuilder's bulk cycle, but without any of the scientific understanding of nutrition. Imagine gorging yourself daily, then suddenly cutting back. The physical shock to your system would have been immense. Sleep was also a crucial component, though probably not the luxurious 8 hours you might envision. Athletes would sleep on hard beds, often on the ground, and their rest would be structured around their demanding training schedule. Early mornings were common, with training often beginning at dawn to avoid the worst of the midday heat. The ancient Greeks understood the importance of recovery, even if their methods were empirical rather than scientific. They observed that bodies needed rest to repair and grow stronger. Beyond the physical, there was a profound psychological element to the training. Athletes were taught discipline, self-control, and mental fortitude. They learned to ignore pain, to push past perceived limits, and to maintain focus under immense pressure. The gymnasts would not only drill them physically, but also verbally, instilling a fierce competitive spirit and an unwavering belief in their own capabilities. This mental toughness was arguably as important as physical strength, especially in events where a moment of hesitation could mean defeat. Consider the equipment, or rather the lack thereof. No fancy running shoes with shock absorption, no padded gloves for boxers, no mouth guards. You'd run barefoot or in simple sandals. Boxers wrapped their hands with strips of leather often hardened with lead or bronze inserts known as hymantes. These were not for protection, they were designed to inflict maximum damage. A punch delivered with hymantes could easily shatter bones, rupture organs, or cause deep lacerations. It's a brutal truth that the ancient boxers weren't trying to score points. They were trying to knock you out permanently. The sound of these hardened leather wraps connecting with flesh must have been horrifying. The training grounds themselves, the gymnasia, were open-air facilities, essentially large dirt fields. There might be a running track areas for wrestling and pits for jumping. The elements were a constant factor. Training in blistering heat, driving rain, or chilling winds was simply part of the routine. There was no escaping the natural world, no climate control to make things easier. This further toughened the athletes, making them resilient to whatever conditions they might face during the games. You can almost feel the grit of the dirt beneath your bare feet, the sun baking your skin, and the sweat stinging your eyes. Another unsettling aspect was the constant presence of potential injury and its devastating consequences. A torn muscle, a broken bone, a severe cut. Any of these could mean the end of your career, and with it your dreams of glory. There was no sophisticated medical care. Treatment often involved basic bandaging, herbal remedies, and the hopes that the gods would intervene. Many promising athletes saw their careers cut short by injuries that modern medicine could easily fix. The risk was ever present, a silent specter looming over every training session. The ultimate goal, of course, was to achieve arete, a concept that translates roughly to excellence or virtue. For the ancient Greeks, arete was not just about winning, it was about embodying the ideal of human potential, physical, moral, and intellectual. The athlete striving for arete was a living embodiment of the highest human achievement. This philosophical underpinning, however, did not diminish the raw, visceral desire for victory. In fact, it probably intensified it because victory was seen as a manifestation of that very excellence. One curious detail that often surprises people is the use of oil. Athletes would coat their bodies in olive oil before training and competition. This wasn't just for aesthetic purposes, it served several functions. It helped to keep the skin supple in the harsh sun, provided a protective layer against dust and dirt, and made combatants slippery, making it harder for opponents to get a grip. After training, they would use a strigil, a curved metal scraper, to remove the oil, sweat, and dirt from their bodies. This ritual of oiling and scraping was a central part of an athlete's daily routine, a sensory experience that connected them to their physical form and the demands placed upon it. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from earlier? Imagine slathering that on with olive oil. The training wasn't just about strength and endurance. It was about pushing the very boundaries of human tolerance for pain and discomfort. You learned to ignore your body's screams to find a reserves of energy you didn't know you possessed. The gymnasts would verbally abuse you, push you to exhaustion, and force you to confront your own weaknesses. It was a psychological crucible as much as a physical one. You learned to embrace the suffering, to see it not as an obstacle but as a path to greatness. Finally, think about the isolation. While there were other athletes training alongside you, the journey to athletic excellence was ultimately a solitary one. You lived a life apart, constantly focused on your goal-making sacrifices that most ordinary people could not comprehend. Your relationships might suffer, your social life would be minimal, and your entire existence would revolve around the next training session, the next competition. This intense dedication, bordering on obsession, was both the source of their incredible achievements and arguably one of the more disturbing secrets of their success. It was a lonely path to glory. You're still feeling that ancient dust, aren't you? The burn in your muscles from imagined training, the ache in your bones from phantom blows. You've glimpsed the brutal regimen, the relentless pursuit of physical perfection. But now, let's step into the arena of the competition itself, where the stakes were impossibly high, and the pursuit of victory often twisted into something far more sinister: cheating, curses, and corruption. The noble ideal of athletic purity was often just a thin veil. Imagine the deafening roar of the crowd, the sun glaring off the oiled bodies of the competitors. You're standing on the edge of the track, or perhaps in the wrestling pit, your heart pounding. The pressure is immense. Your entire reputation, your family's honor, your future livelihood, it all hinges on this moment. And where there is such immense pressure, there is always the temptation to gain an unfair advantage. Cheating in the ancient Olympics wasn't just a possibility, it was a documented reality. The Greeks, for all their philosophical ideals, were pragmatic. Victory was paramount, and some were willing to bend, if not outright break the rules, to achieve it. One of the most common forms of cheating involved bribery. Athletes would attempt to bribe their opponents to throw a match, to feign injury, or simply to not try their best. Imagine a runner exhausted and on the verge of collapse, being offered a substantial sum of money to simply slow down in the final stretch. The temptation must have been immense, especially for those who weren't born into wealth. But it wasn't just athletes bribing other athletes. Sometimes trainers, judges, or even city-states would get involved. A wealthy patron might try to ensure their athlete's victory by paying off officials to make favorable calls or to overlook fouls. The sanctity of the games was often undermined by the very human desire for power and prestige. And if you think about it, with no instant replay, no slow-motion cameras, and only human eyes to judge, it would have been remarkably easy for a biased official to sway the outcome. The consequences of being caught cheating, however, were severe and designed to be a lasting deterrent. Remember those Zeus statues we talked about? The bronze statues of Zeus, paid for by the fines levied against cheaters, stood as permanent monuments to disgrace. Each statue bore an inscription detailing the name of the athlete and their transgression. Imagine being forever immortalized, not for your athletic prowess, but for your dishonor. It was a public shaming that would follow you and your family for generations. Your name would be synonymous with deceit, whispered with scorn among future generations of athletes and spectators. Historians still debate whether the sheer public humiliation of the Zeus was a more effective deterrent than any physical punishment. Beyond direct bribery, there were more subtle forms of cheating. Athletes might try to sabotage their opponent's training, spread false rumors, or even try to disrupt their sleep before a competition. The competitive spirit, while admirable, could easily curdle into outright malice. Think of the petty rivalries in modern sports magnified a thousandfold by the life-or-death stakes of ancient times. Then there's the darker, more mystical side of trying to gain an advantage: curses and magic. In ancient Greece, belief in the supernatural was widespread and deeply ingrained. If you wanted to ensure your victory, or more often ensure your opponent's defeat, you might turn to a curse. These were not just idle threats, they were formal written spells, often inscribed on lead tablets known as defictiones, or curse tablets. You might commission a sorcerer or a practitioner of magic to write a curse, which would then be secretly buried near the stadium, in a grave or somewhere the intended victim would pass by. These tablets would often invoke chthonic deities, gods and spirits of the underworld, to bind the limbs of an opponent to make them stumble, to drain their strength, or even to cause them injury or death. Imagine finding a small lead tablet buried near the starting line with your name scrawled on it alongside an invocation to Hades to shatter your leg. The psychological impact alone would be devastating. These curses weren't always directed at physical performance. They could also target an opponent's luck, their reputation, or their ability to focus. The belief in their efficacy was so strong that even if the curse had no actual magical power, the sheer fear and anxiety it instilled in the victim could certainly affect their performance. If you truly believed you were cursed, you might become hesitant, lose confidence, or even manifest physical symptoms of distress. The practice of magic and curses also highlights the desperation that could creep into the games. Athletes weren't just relying on their physical abilities, they were also trying to manipulate unseen forces to appeal to a supernatural power that could tip the scales in their favor. It speaks to a deep-seated insecurity, a fear that even with all the training and dedication, victory might still elude them unless they resorted to illicit means. You can almost imagine a modern athlete trying to find a lucky pregame ritual, but instead they're digging up curse tablets. Corruption extended beyond the athletes themselves. The city-states that sponsored athletes had a vested interest in their success. A victory at Olympia brought immense prestige and honor to the athlete's home city, almost as much as it did to the athlete himself. This meant that city officials might be complicit in cheating schemes or even instigate them. They would offer lavish rewards to victorious athletes: lifetime pensions, free meals, statues in their honor, further fueling the desire to win at all costs. The line between supporting an athlete and actively encouraging illicit practices could become very thin. Even the judging process, theoretically impartial, was not immune to corruption. Judges known as Hellenodikai were highly respected citizens, trained for months before the games to ensure fairness and uphold tradition. Yet they were still human and subject to the same temptations and pressures as anyone else. There are historical accounts of judges being bribed or making questionable calls that favored one athlete over another. While theoretically incorruptible, the realities of human nature often intervened. If a judge was found to be corrupt, the consequences were dire, often involving heavy fines and public disgrace, much like the athletes themselves. The very atmosphere of the games, with its intense pressure and fierce rivalries, created a fertile ground for these darker practices to flourish. The roar of the crowd, the fervent prayers to the gods, the intoxicating smell of victory, it all contributed to an environment where the line between acceptable competition and illicit gain blurred. The disturbing secrets aren't just about the physical hardships, they're about the moral compromises, the ethical dilemmas, and the lengths to which humans will go when faced with the ultimate prize. The enduring fascination with these ancient games isn't just about the athletic feats, it's about the very human drama that unfolded: the triumphs and tragedies, the honor and the shame. And understanding the role of cheating, curses, and corruption provides a far more nuanced and perhaps unsettling picture of what it truly meant to compete and to win in ancient Olympia. It reminds you that the pursuit of greatness, then as now, often walks hand in hand with temptation. You're still there. In the dusty plains of Olympia, the echoes of the crowd, the lingering scent of sacrifice and human ambition. We've journeyed through the grueling training and the dark undercurrents of cheating. Now let's peel back another layer to reveal the intricate, often unsettling relationship between the sacred and the savage sacred rituals, unholy acts. The ancient Olympics weren't just a sporting event. They were a profound religious festival, and the line between devotion and brutality was often blurred. Imagine the dawn breaking over the Altais, the sacred grove dedicated to Zeus. The air, already thick with the scent of olive oil and human exertion, now carries the distinct pungent aroma of burning flesh. This isn't just a barbecue. This is hecatomb, the sacrifice of 100 oxen to Zeus. It's a truly massive undertaking, a central ritual of the games. You can see the long lines of animals being led to the altars, their lowing adding to the cacophony of the gathering crowds. Priests robed in ceremonial garments move with practiced precision, their knives glinting in the morning light. The sight is both awe-inspiring and viscerally disturbing. For the ancient Greeks, these sacrifices were not merely symbolic. They were a direct communion with the gods, a means of honoring them, seeking their favor, and ensuring the success of the games. The smoke rising from the altars was believed to carry the prayers and offerings directly to Mount Olympus. The very act of killing these animals, spilling their blood, and burning their choicest parts was seen as a necessary and sacred duty. But from a modern perspective, the sheer scale of the slaughter, the raw, unadulterated violence of it is undeniably unsettling. You can almost hear the animals' last breaths, the sharp crack of bones as they are prepared for the pyre. The blood, it was believed, purified the grounds and appeased the deities. The entrails of the sacrificed animals were often inspected for omens, providing clues about the will of the gods or the likely outcome of the games. Imagine the weight of that responsibility on the priests interpreting the patterns of a steaming liver to predict the fate of an athlete or a city-state. It added another layer of superstition and uncertainty to an already high-stakes event. Beyond the grand hecatomb, countless smaller sacrifices would occur throughout the games. Athletes themselves or their patrons would offer up animals' libations of wine or other precious items to specific gods and goddesses, hoping for a personal blessing, strength in competition, or protection from injury. You might see a wrestler offering a small piglet to Hermes, the patron of athletes, or a runner pouring wine onto a small altar dedicated to Nike, the goddess of victory. These personal acts of devotion were deeply ingrained in the fabric of the competition. The most important religious structure at Olympia was the Temple of Zeus, a monumental edifice housing the colossal chryselephantine gold and ivory statue of Zeus, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. Imagine walking into that temple. The sheer scale of the statue, approximately 13 meters 43 feet tall, would have been overwhelming. Zeus enthroned holding a statue of Nike in one hand and a scepter in the other would have radiated immense power and authority. Athletes would prostrate themselves before this awe-inspiring image, offering prayers and making vows. The atmosphere inside the temple would be thick with incense-hushed reverence and the palpable sense of divine presence. Before competing, athletes were required to swear a solemn oath before the statue of Zeus Horkios, the oath-taking Zeus, as we mentioned before. This wasn't just a formality, it was a deeply religious commitment. You would stand before the gods surrounded by the Zanes, statues of past cheaters, and swear on your life and honor that you had trained for at least 10 months, would compete fairly, and would not engage in any deceitful practices. The weight of this oath, backed by the fear of divine retribution and public shame, was immense. To break such an oath was not just to cheat the rules of the game, but to commit sacrilege against the very God who presided over them. But the religious devotion wasn't always serene. There were elements of intense, almost frenzied passion. During certain rituals, the air might be filled with chanting, the rhythmic beat of drums, or the haunting sound of flutes. The line between religious ecstasy and a kind of barbaric fervor could blur, especially as the energy of the crowd swelled. For the ancient Greeks, the gods were not distant, abstract entities. They were active participants in human affairs, capable of great benevolence and terrible wrath. One of the more unsettling, unholy acts, intertwined with the sacred, was the potential for ritualized violence beyond the formal competitions. While not officially sanctioned, the sheer number of people, the competitive spirit, and the lack of robust law enforcement could lead to brawls, feuds, and even deaths outside the stadium. Imagine the tension among rival city-states. the simmering resentment which could easily erupt into violence under the influence of alcohol and the intense emotions of the games. The sacred precinct, theoretically a place of peace, could become a hotspot for very human conflict. Furthermore, some historians suggest that the extreme physical demands of certain events, particularly the pancration, bordered on being a form of ritualized sacrifice in themselves. The willingness of athletes to fight to the death or suffer grievous injury could be seen as an offering of their very bodies and will to the gods, a demonstration of ultimate devotion in pursuit of arete. While not explicitly human sacrifice, the sheer disregard for personal safety certainly aligns with a mindset where pain and suffering could be seen as purifying or divinely favored. The role of prophecies and omens also played a significant, if disturbing, part. Before important events, people would consult oracles, such as the famous oracle at Delphi, seeking guidance or predictions about outcomes. The answers, often cryptic, could influence an athlete's confidence or a city-state's strategy. Imagine an athlete receiving a grim prophecy before a crucial match. The psychological toll could be immense, a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy of defeat. The academic debate continues on just how much these omens truly influence the outcomes versus simply reflecting existing anxieties. There's also the curious case of the sacred truce, or ekatkeria. For the duration of the Olympic Games, all warfare between Greek city-states was supposed to cease. Messengers known as spondophoroi would travel across the Greek world proclaiming the truce and ensuring safe passage for athletes and spectators. While this sounds wonderfully civilized, the reality was often more complex. The truce was frequently violated or narrowly interpreted to allow for skirmishes just outside the sacred zone. Some cities used the truce as an opportunity to move troops or consolidate power, knowing their enemies would be distracted or bound by the agreement. It highlights the inherent tension between the ideal of sacred peace and the constant geopolitical struggles of the time. This sacred peace was often a fragile thing easily shattered by ambition. The very choice of Olympia as the site of a rural sanctuary rather than a bustling city underscores its religious significance. It was a place apart dedicated to the gods where human endeavors could be elevated to a divine plane. Yet, even in this sacred setting, human flaws, greed, violence, and desperation found ways to manifest themselves. The contrast between the solemn rituals and the brutal realities of competition, the lofty ideals and the base human instincts, creates a compelling and somewhat disturbing picture. Ultimately, the Olympic Games were a profound expression of ancient Greek belief, a powerful demonstration of their cosmology. Every race run, every punch thrown, every discus hurled was not just an athletic feat, but an act imbued with spiritual meaning. The disturbing secrets of the Games, therefore, aren't just about what happened on the field, but what transpired in the spiritual realm, and how deeply intertwined the sacred and the unholy truly were. The gods were watching, and their favor was something to be earned or sometimes desperately manipulated. You're still breathing the dust of Olympia, aren't you? The roar of the crowd, the chilling scent of sacrifice, and the unsettling mix of piety and perfidy. We've explored the physical crucible and the spiritual complexities. Now let's peel back another layer to uncover the stark realities of the naked truth of power. How social hierarchies and political machinations dictated who could compete, who could truly win, and how even athletic glory was a tool in the hands of the powerful. Imagine yourself as an ordinary Greek citizen, perhaps a humble farmer or a skilled artisan. You dream of Olympic glory, but the path to the stadium is not merely paved with sweat and dedication. It's paved with drachmas connections and the right lineage. While theoretically open to all freeborn Greek men, the brutal truth was that only the wealthy truly had a realistic chance of competing, let alone winning. Why? Because athletic training was an all-consuming profession. To dedicate years of your life to rigorous physical conditioning meant you couldn't be working in the fields, running a shop, or tending to livestock. It required significant leisure time and financial support. Only the rich could afford to forgo income pay for their trainers' gymnasts and support themselves during their demanding regimen. A poor man, even if blessed with immense natural talent, would likely never be able to commit to the necessary full-time training. He had to eat after all. It's like trying to become a professional athlete today without a scholarship or a rich sponsor. Incredibly difficult. So you'd mostly see the sons of aristocratic families, the landed gentry, or those from wealthy merchant classes gracing the Olympic grounds. These men were not just athletes. They were often prominent citizens expected to embody the ideals of Greek masculinity and civic virtue. Their victories were not just personal triumphs. They were triumphs for their powerful families and, crucially, for their city-states. And this brings us to the core of the political machinations. The Olympic Games were a massive stage for inter-city-state rivalry. A victory by an athlete brought immense prestige not just to the individual, but to his polis, his city-state. Imagine the bragging rights. Our city produced an Olympic victor. This translated into political influence, enhanced reputation, and even boosted morale among the populace. A winning city-state might find it easier to negotiate treaties, secure alliances, or simply assert its dominance over rivals. Wealthy patrons and city-states would invest heavily in promising athletes, providing them with resources, trainers, and support, seeing it as a direct investment in their own political capital. An athlete was in many ways a living billboard for his city-state's power and prosperity. This meant that the line between athletic competition and political proxy warfare was often incredibly thin. You might see athletes from Sparta, Athens, Corinth, or Syracuse, each vying for supremacy not just in the stadium, but symbolically for their respective political entities. The power dynamics extended to the very eligibility rules. Only freeborn Greek men were allowed to compete. This was a fundamental principle rigidly enforced. Non-Greeks, or barbarians as they were called, were excluded, highlighting the strong ethnic and cultural identity that defined the games. Slaves were also barred, a stark reminder of the massive social chasm that existed in ancient Greek society. Even if a slave possessed extraordinary physical gifts, the very notion of them competing alongside free citizens would have been unthinkable. It was a visible manifestation of the social hierarchy, a clear statement of who belonged and who did not. This exclusivity also meant that the narratives of the games were largely controlled by the elite. The poets who immortalized the victors, the historians who recorded the events, and the sculptors who crafted their likenesses were all part of a system that celebrated and reinforced the existing power structures. The stories you hear about the ancient Olympics are often the stories of the privileged, their achievements amplified by their social standing. Furthermore, the judges, the Hellenodikai, were themselves powerful citizens, chosen for their integrity and knowledge of the rules. Their decisions were final, and their authority immense. While they aimed for impartiality, their social connections and political leanings could subtly, or not so subtly, influence their judgments. A close call in a wrestling match, a questionable foul in a chariot race. These could have significant implications, and the judges, as products of their society, were susceptible to the pressures and expectations of the powerful. One of the more unsettling examples of power dynamics at play was the phenomenon of chariot racing. This was arguably the most prestigious and dangerous event. But here's the kicker: the victor wasn't necessarily the driver. The owner of the horses and chariot received the olive wreath and the glory. These owners were invariably the incredibly wealthy, the aristocrats and even tyrants and kings who could afford to maintain stables of thoroughbred horses and higher-skilled, often slave drivers. The drivers themselves, though, risking their lives, rarely received the same recognition. Imagine owning a Formula One team today and only the owner gets the trophy, not the driver who actually races the car. It's a stark illustration of how economic power directly translated into athletic glory. Academics still debate how much this disconnect between effort and reward contributed to the public perception of the drivers themselves. Even women, though largely excluded from the main Olympic Games, had their own separate festival, the Uraean Games, also held at Olympia, dedicated to the goddess Hera. These games, much smaller in scale, involved foot races for unmarried women. While this provided an outlet for female athletic expression, it also highlighted their subordinate status. They couldn't compete with men, nor could they even attend the male games. The very existence of separate games reinforced gender roles and the male-dominated nature of the primary festival. The penalty for a married woman caught at the male Olympics thrown from the Tepean cliff underscores the extreme measures taken to enforce these gender-based power structures. The concept of eugenics also subtly wove its way into the fabric of Greek athletic culture. While not explicitly stated in the context of the Olympics, the Greek emphasis on physical perfection and the ideal human form implicitly encouraged a focus on breeding strong, healthy citizens. The celebrations of victorious athletes with their idealized bodies served as public affirmations of this cultural value. It was a subtle yet pervasive societal pressure to strive for physical excellence, not just for sport, but for the betterment of the polis as a whole. The very concept of the truce during the Olympics also demonstrates the underlying power struggles. While the Ekakaraya supposedly halted all warfare, it was often used as a political tool. Cities might abide by it to ensure their athletes could compete, but also to gain strategic advantages by moving troops or consolidating resources during the period of peace. It wasn't a purely humanitarian gesture, it was a pragmatic calculation within a volatile geopolitical landscape. The disturbing truth about the naked truth of power in the ancient Olympics is that athletic excellence, while certainly admired, was often merely a means to an end. It was a tool for political posturing, a testament to wealth, and a reinforcement of existing social hierarchies. The olive wreath, the symbol of ultimate victory, was not just a reward for physical prowess. It was often a crown placed upon the head of privilege, celebrated by those who held the levers of power in the ancient world. You leave Olympia with a clearer understanding that even in the pursuit of glory, the hand of power was always at play, shaping destinies and dictating who would truly stand in the winner's circle. You're still absorbing the raw, untamed spirit of ancient Olympia, feeling the weight of power and privilege that hung heavy in the air. We've seen the male-dominated arena, but now let's shift our gaze to a different, often misunderstood aspect of ancient Greek society: women wives and warriors. Their roles in the Olympic spectacle were far more complex and often contradictory than you might initially assume, ranging from absolute prohibition to surprising participation. Imagine for a moment being a woman in ancient Greece during the Olympic Games. Your experience would be dramatically different, profoundly shaped by social norms and strict laws. The most widely known rule, and perhaps the most jarring to modern sensibilities, was the absolute prohibition against married women attending the male Olympic Games. This wasn't a suggestion, it was law enforced with the ultimate penalty: death. Any married woman caught within the sacred precinct during the games was liable to be thrown from the Typaian cliff, a grim, jagged precipice overlooking the Altas. This draconian rule speaks volumes about the patriarchal nature of ancient Greek society and the perceived purity of the Olympic Games. The reasons given for this prohibition are debated by historians, but theories range from maintaining the sanctity of the male-only athletic nudity to preventing distractions for the athletes, or even to the idea that the games were a form of religious observance meant only for men. Whatever the exact rationale, the threat of death was a clear and unambiguous deterrent, enforcing a profound separation between male and female spheres. You can almost feel the chilling wind whipping around that cliff face, a stark reminder of the stakes involved. So if you were a married woman, your experience of the Olympics would be through the filtered accounts of your male relatives, if at all. You might hear the stories, share in the pride of a local victory, but you would never witness the spectacle firsthand. This imposed distance highlights the limited public roles generally afforded to women in classical Greece, their lives largely confined to the household and domestic duties. However, there's a fascinating, often overlooked exception to this rule: priestesses. The priestess of Demeter Chamine, for instance, held a highly privileged position. She was the only married woman allowed to attend the Olympic Games, and not just attend, but occupy a prominent seat directly opposite the judges. Her presence underscores the deep religious significance of the Games, as Demeter was the goddess of the harvest and sacred law, and her priestess's attendance ensured the divine blessing for the proceedings. Imagine the intense scrutiny on this sole woman, a symbol of divine sanction amidst a sea of men. Her very presence was an anomaly, highlighting the rigid rule by its very exception. But what about other women? While married, women were excluded. Unmarried women and girls were in some accounts permitted to attend. This distinction is crucial. It suggests that the prohibition was specifically aimed at married women, perhaps to preserve modesty or to prevent any perceived challenge to male authority within the sacred space. You might see young girls, their eyes wide with wonder, observing the races, perhaps even dreaming of a different kind of glory. And indeed, women had their own avenue for athletic competition, the Hurrian Games. Held every 4 years, typically a month or two after the male Olympics, these games were dedicated to Hera, the queen of the gods and Zeus's wife. They were organized and participated in by women, specifically unmarried women, and consisted primarily of foot races. The track was reportedly shorter than the men's, and the women wore a special tunic that left their right shoulder bare. The victors received crowns of olive and a share of the sacrificed cow dedicated to Hera. The Hurrian Games are a crucial piece of the puzzle. They demonstrate that the ancient Greeks did not completely dismiss female athleticism. While the Hurrian Games were smaller in scale and prestige compared to the Olympics, they offered women a rare public platform for physical excellence and competition. It was a space where they could exhibit their own form of arete. Historians still debate whether the Hurrian Games were a true parallel to the Olympics or merely a symbolic concession within a patriarchal society. Regardless, they provided a fascinating counterpoint to the absolute exclusion of women from the main event. Beyond direct participation, women played a vital, if indirect, role through their family connections. The mothers, sisters, and daughters of victorious athletes would share in the reflected glory. A male athlete's triumph elevated his entire family, enhancing their social standing and reputation within their community. Imagine the pride of a mother whose son brought home an Olympic olive wreath, a lifelong honor that transcended the strict gender divisions of public life. And then there were the owners of chariot teams. Remember how the owner, not the driver, received the prize in chariot racing. This loophole allowed women provided they were wealthy enough to achieve Olympic victory. Cyniska of Sparta is the most famous example. The daughter of King Archidamus II of Sparta, Cyniska was the first woman to win an Olympic victory. She owned a chariot team that won the four-horse chariot race in 396 BCE and again in 392 BCE. This was a remarkable feat, breaking a deeply entrenched barrier. Her success highlights that while women couldn't compete physically in the male games, their economic power could still translate into Olympic glory. It was a victory won through wealth and status, demonstrating that even in this ancient male-dominated spectacle, wealth could create pathways to prominence for women. The story of Cyniska also reveals the unique position of Spartan women. Spartan society, known for its rigorous training of both boys and girls, offered women more freedom and physical education than many other Greek city-states. Spartan women were encouraged to train physically to produce strong, healthy offspring, contributing to the state's military might. This cultural context perhaps made it more conceivable for a Spartan woman to own and enter a chariot team. Finally, consider the wives and mothers who endured the emotional toll of the games. Their husbands, sons, and brothers were risking injury, even death, for glory. Imagine the anxiety as they waited for news, the immense relief of victory, or the crushing despair of defeat or tragedy. While physically distant from the stadium, their emotional investment would have been profound. They were the silent supporters, the backbone of the household, bearing the burden of domestic life while their male relatives pursued fame. The roles of women in the ancient Olympics were a microcosm of their broader societal roles, mostly confined, sometimes subtly influential, and occasionally surprisingly defiant. The disturbing secrets aren't just about the exclusion, but about the deeply ingrained assumptions about gender, the harsh penalties for deviation, and the occasional remarkable ways in which women, through cunning or privilege, found their own pathways to Olympic triumph. It paints a more nuanced and sometimes more frustrating picture of ancient Greek society. You're still within the ancient confines of Olympia, the echoes of chariot wheels and the scent of human ambition clinging to the air. We've explored the subtle, often contradictory roles of women. Now let's shift our focus to the ultimate aftermath beyond the finish line. What truly awaited the victors and what grim fates befell the vanquished? The glory was immense, yes, but the fall could be equally devastating. Imagine the triumphant athlete. You've just crossed the finish line first, or pinned your opponent to the dust, or flung your discus further than anyone else. The crowd erupts. This isn't just polite applause, it's a roaring, surging wave of adulation. You are no longer just a man, you are a hero, a semi-divine figure in that moment. The Hellenodic high, the judges approach you and place the simple yet infinitely precious kotinos, a wreath of wild olive on your head. This wreath cut from the sacred olive tree in the Altis was the ultimate prize. No gold, no silver, just a symbol of pure, unadulterated glory. You can almost feel the scratch of the rough leaves against your brow, a tangible connection to history. But the glory didn't stop there. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of celebration. Poets would compose odes in your honor, sculptors would immortalize your physique in marble or bronze, and your name would be proclaimed throughout the Greek world. You would participate in a triumphal procession often carried aloft on the shoulders of your adoring fans. Feasts would be held in your honor with lavish banquets where you, the victor, would be the guest of honor. This was your moment in the sun, a culmination of years of brutal training and sacrifice. Returning to your home city-state, the reception would be even more spectacular. You wouldn't simply walk through the city gates. In some instances, a section of the city wall might be ceremonially breached, allowing you to enter directly through the opening. This symbolized that a city with an Olympic victor was so strong, so divinely favored that it no longer needed its walls for protection. It was an extraordinary gesture reserved only for the most celebrated heroes. You would be welcomed with parades, more feasts, and public acclamation. The rewards for victory were not just symbolic. While the olive wreath was the official prize at Olympia, your home city would shower you with tangible benefits. Many cities granted Olympic victors a lifetime pension, often free meals at the public expense known as sightsis. Imagine never having to worry about putting food on the table again, all because of your athletic prowess. You might receive significant sums of money tax exemptions and even prominent political positions. Victory at Olympia could be a golden ticket to a life of comfort and influence, transforming your social standing forever. Some victors were even seen as having semi-divine status. They might be revered like local heroes, almost worshipped in certain contexts, with cults sometimes forming around their memory after their death. Their physical excellence was seen as a sign of divine favor, a reflection of the gods' approval. The most famous example is perhaps Milo of Croton, a legendary wrestler who won 6 Olympic titles. His strength and feats became the stuff of legend, blurring the line between man and myth. Stories abound of his incredible strength, from carrying a bull on his shoulders to bursting a band around his head simply by holding his breath. He became a living embodiment of heroic strength. But what about the vanquished? This is where the story takes a much darker turn. For every victor, there were dozens, hundreds, even thousands of losers. And for them, the experience was utterly crushing. Imagine the agony of defeat after years of dedicated training, immense personal sacrifice, and often insignificant financial investment. The Greeks had a saying, "The defeated returned home through the back alleys." This wasn't just a turn of phrase, it was often a literal reality. A defeated athlete would typically leave Olympia in shame, often avoiding public roads and entering their hometown discreetly through a side gate or by night to avoid public scorn. There were no participation trophies in ancient Greece. There was only victory or utter failure. The pressure to win was so immense that failure was not merely disappointing, it was a deep personal humiliation. Your family might be shamed, your trainers disgraced, and your financial backers might lose their investment and their hopes for reflected glory. The emotional and psychological toll on the vanquished must have been immense. Imagine spending years honing your body, sacrificing everything, only to fall short in the crucial moment. The ancient sources describe the defeated athletes as weeping, hiding their faces in shame, and sometimes even contemplating suicide. For many, a lost Olympic bid meant the end of their athletic career, and a return to anonymity, their dreams shattered. The brutal reality was that for many, defeat meant a return to a life of hard labor or obscurity, with the added burden of carrying the stigma of failure. Their years of specialized training would then be seen as a waste, a misinvestment of time and resources. The hopes of their city-state, their family, and their patrons would lie shattered alongside their own. There was no professional sports league to fall back on, no lucrative endorsement deals for the runner-up. You won or you simply faded away. The beyond the finish line also speaks to the long-term impact on the athletes' bodies. Even for the victors, years of brutal training and competition took a severe toll. The lack of modern medical care meant that chronic injuries, arthritis, and disfigurement were common. Boxers and pancratiasts often suffered from cauliflower ears, broken noses, and damaged joints. Runners' knees and feet would bear the brunt of endless pounding on hard ground. While celebrated in their youth, many ancient athletes likely faced a lifetime of physical pain and diminished mobility in their later years. The glory came at a high physical price. Consider the contrast: the immortalized victor lauded, fed, and honored for life, versus the anonymous loser often physically broken and socially disgraced. This stark dichotomy highlights one of the more disturbing truths of the ancient games. They were a system that produced extreme winners and extreme losers with very little in between. The pursuit of glory was a perilous gamble with truly life-altering consequences for both success and failure. The lasting legacy of the victors, preserved in the writings of poets like Pindar and in the scattered remains of their statues, paints a picture of unparalleled success. But for every celebrated name, countless others simply disappeared from the historical record, their dreams unfulfilled. Their sacrifices rendered seemingly meaningless by defeat. The silence surrounding the vanquished is in itself a disturbing secret. It reminds us that history is often written by the victors, and the stories of those who fell short are often lost to the sands of time. You're still within the ancient Olympic grounds, aren't you? The thrill of victory and the sting of defeat still palpable in the air. We've explored the glory that awaited the champions and the crushing anonymity of the vanquished. Now let's confront one of the most ever-present and truly disturbing realities of the ancient games: death, disease, and disqualification. These weren't just abstract risks. They were grim possibilities that lurked around every corner, shaping the lives and fates of the athletes. Imagine the sheer physical exertion required. These athletes were pushing their bodies to the absolute limit, far beyond what most modern athletes might endure, often without the benefit of scientific understanding of physiology or proper medical care. The relentless sun, the intense physical contact, and the primitive conditions all contributed to an environment ripe for disaster. Death during competition was a tragic, though not unheard of, occurrence. In events like boxing and pancration, where blows were delivered with hardened leather straps, the Himantes often waited and submissions were fought to the bitter end. A competitor could easily be killed. A well-placed punch, a chokehold held too long, or a fall that resulted in a fractured skull could and did lead to fatalities. The goal in these brutal sports wasn't just to win, it was to inflict enough damage to force your opponent into submission or incapacitation. And sometimes that incapacitation was permanent. You can almost hear the crack of bone and the ragged gasp for air, a stark reminder of the raw violence. Stories circulate of athletes dying during their contests, sometimes even achieving a posthumous victory, if their opponent yielded before realizing they had inflicted a fatal blow. Imagine the horror of such a win. The olive wreath placed on the head of a lifeless body. These weren't just isolated incidents, they were a grim acknowledgement of the inherent dangers of such extreme competition. The crowd, while cheering for victory, was also tacitly acknowledging the high stakes where life itself was on the line. Beyond direct combat, other events carried their own lethal risks. Chariot racing, for instance, was incredibly dangerous. The chariots were flimsy, the track dusty and uneven, and collisions were frequent. Horses could trip, chariots could overturn, and drivers could be dragged, trampled, or crushed. The roar of the crowd would often turn into gasps of horror as chariots splintered and bodies were flung across the arena. For all its prestige, chariot racing was a bloody spectacle where fatal accidents were a regular feature. Then there was the constant threat of disease. Imagine thousands of people from across the Greek world converging on a single, relatively small site. Sanitation was rudimentary at best. Open latrines limited fresh water, and the immense heat created a perfect breeding ground for illnesses. Dysentery, typhoid, and other infectious diseases could spread rapidly through the densely packed crowds and temporary encampments. Athletes already physically stressed from their training would be particularly vulnerable. A sudden fever or debilitating stomach illness could end a career or even a life as effectively as a broken bone. There were no antibiotics, no understanding of germ theory. prayer and herbal remedies were often the only recourse. Heat stroke and dehydration were also ever-present dangers. Competing in the scorching Greek summer, often without adequate hydration or understanding of how to manage electrolyte balance, placed immense strain on the body. Runners might collapse mid-race, their bodies pushed beyond their limits, succumbing to the unforgiving sun. The long-distance events in particular would have tested the very limits of human endurance in such conditions. And then the quiet, insidious threat of injury. A torn ligament, a dislocated joint, a deep cut. These weren't just painful, they were often career-ending. Without proper diagnosis, surgery, or rehabilitation, even seemingly minor injuries could lead to chronic pain, permanent disability, or an early retirement from competition. Athletes would carry the physical scars of their Olympic aspirations throughout their lives, a testament to the brutal demands placed on their bodies. Academics continue to study skeletal remains from this period, often finding evidence of healed fractures and joint deformities consistent with intense athletic activity. Finally, there was the ignominy of disqualification. While not life-threatening in the same way as death or disease, disqualification was a social death sentence for an athlete. We've already touched on the Zanes statues for cheating, but there were other reasons for disqualification. Failing to adhere to the strict rules of the event, arriving late, or simply not meeting the required standards could lead to you being cast out of the competition. For an athlete who had dedicated years to their craft, being disqualified was a profound humiliation, a public stripping away of their dignity and aspirations. Imagine the shame of being marched past the Zanes, those bronze reminders of past cheaters, knowing that your own name might soon be added to that grim gallery. The public outcry, the disappointment of your city-state, and the personal despair would be immense. It was a complete and utter repudiation of your efforts, a declaration that you were not worthy. The stories of death, disease, and disqualification serve as a chilling reminder that the ancient Olympics, for all their glory, were not for the faint of heart. They were a crucible where human ambition clashed with the harsh realities of the ancient world. Athletes gambled not just their honor, but their very well-being, and sometimes their lives for the chance at eternal fame. These disturbing secrets remind us that the pursuit of excellence was often a perilous journey, fraught with dangers that most modern athletes can scarcely imagine. You're still feeling the ancient grit of Olympia, aren't you? The shadow of potential death and disease, the lingering dread of disqualification. We've explored the physical tolls and the ultimate failures. Now let's delve deeper into one of the most unique and enduring, disturbing secrets of the ancient games, the curious case of the Zanes. These weren't just statues. They were monuments to shame, a chilling reminder of the unwavering demand for fairness and the powerful role of public disgrace. Imagine yourself walking along the sacred pathway leading into the Olympic Stadium, your heart pounding with anticipation. But as you approach, your eyes are drawn not just to the grand entrance, but to a series of bronze statues lining the path. These are the Zanes, and their very presence sends a shiver down your spine. They aren't statues of triumphant victors. Oh no. Each one commemorates a cheater rule-breaker, a person who dared to defile the sanctity of the games. The origin of the Zanes is intrinsically linked to the concept of the sacred oath. Remember, before competing, every athlete, along with their trainers, swore a solemn oath before the statue of Zeus Horkios, the oath-taking Zeus. This was a pledge to compete fairly without fraud or deceit, and to adhere strictly to the rules. To break this oath was not just to break a rule of man, it was to commit sacrilege against Zeus himself, the chief god of the Olympic Games. When an athlete was caught cheating, whether through bribery, foul play, or any other dishonest means, the consequences were severe. They weren't just disqualified, they or their city-state were forced to pay a hefty fine. And it was these very fines that funded the creation of the Zane statues. Each statue bore a precise inscription detailing the name of the cheater, their city-state, and the specific transgression they had committed. Imagine the weight of that. Not just a temporary ban, but a permanent bronze monument broadcasting your shame for all eternity. It was the ultimate ancient Greek hall of shame, a stark warning to all who dared to consider bending the rules. The placement of the Zanes was no accident. They were strategically located along the very path that every athlete and spectator had to take to enter the stadium. This ensured maximum visibility. As you, a hopeful competitor, walked towards your moment of glory, you would be forced to pass these grim reminders of fallen heroes, their names forever tarnished. It was a constant visual sermon on the importance of integrity, a psychological deterrent designed to instill fear and respect for the rules. You could almost feel the eyes of past disgraced athletes watching you, judging your intentions. The messages on the Zanes were often quite explicit. They might say, for example, this statue was erected at the expense of athlete's name, of city-state, who won by bribing his opponent, not by strength of body or speed of foot. Such inscriptions left no room for ambiguity. They were direct public condemnations. This very public shaming was considered a far greater punishment than any physical discomfort or temporary financial loss. For the ancient Greeks, honor time was paramount. To lose one's honor and to have that loss immortalized in bronze was truly devastating. There are historical accounts of numerous Zane statues indicating that cheating was not an infrequent occurrence, despite the severe penalties. The fact that the system had to be put in place and repeatedly funded suggests a constant struggle against human nature's darker impulses. Athletes, trainers, and even city-states were clearly tempted by the allure of victory at any cost. The very existence of the Zanes highlights a significant contradiction in the ancient Greek ideal. On one hand, the Olympics were celebrated as a pinnacle of fair play, athletic excellence, and divine favor. On the other hand, the need for such harsh and public punishments reveals a persistent undercurrent of deceit and corruption. It shows that even in a society that valued arete excellence so highly, the desire for victory could often override ethical considerations. Academics continue to ponder whether the Zanes were truly effective as a deterrent or simply a necessary corrective in a system prone to exploitation. Consider the long-term impact on the cheater. Their victory, if they had initially claimed one, would be stripped away. Their name would be synonymous with dishonor. Their descendants would carry the stain of their ancestors' transgression. In a society where family reputation was everything, this was a profound and lasting punishment echoing through generations. No amount of future achievement could truly erase the bronze mark of shame. The Zanes also provided a clear educational function. They taught young athletes as they prepared for their own competitions that while victory was desirable, it had to be earned honestly. They reinforced the values of discipline, self-control, and adherence to rules. It was a tangible lesson in civic virtue hammered home by the very sight of their disgraced predecessors. Beyond the financial penalty, the public humiliation associated with the Zanes served as a powerful reminder of the communal ownership of the games. The Olympics were not just for individual glory. They belonged to all Greeks, a shared cultural and religious heritage. Cheating was not just an offense against an individual or a rule. It was an offense against the entire Greek world, against the gods, and against the very spirit of the festival. The Zanes are a fascinating and disturbing testament to the human condition. They embody the ancient Greek struggle between their lofty ideals of virtue and the persistent reality of human fallibility. They were an ingenious, albeit brutal method of social control, leveraging the power of shame and public memory to enforce integrity in a world that craved glory above all else. As you leave the stadium, the images of those solemn bronze figures etched with the names of the disgraced remain burned into your memory, a silent, powerful warning from millennia past. You're drifting now away from the dusty fields and the solemn Zanes, away from the ancient sun of Olympia. We've journeyed through the unsettling realities of the past, the raw brutality, the hidden machinations, and the stark consequences. But as you begin to resurface, let's consider how these disturbing secrets, these whispers from antiquity, still resonate today, echoes in the modern games. The Olympics you watch on your screen with their dazzling lights and corporate sponsorships carry more of the ancient world within them than you might ever realize. Imagine the opening ceremony of a modern Olympic Games, the parade of nations, the lighting of the torch, the soaring anthems. It's a spectacle of unity and peace, a testament to global cooperation. Yet beneath the veneer, the echoes of ancient power struggles are undeniable. Nations still vie for medal counts, seeing them as a reflection of national strength, economic prosperity, and political influence. Just as an ancient city-state boasted of its Olympic victors, modern nations use their athletes' successes to bolster their international standing. The pursuit of national glory through sport is a direct descendant of the ancient polis rivalries. You can almost hear the old city-states muttering, "We told you so." Consider the relentless pressure on modern athletes. They train for years, dedicating their lives to their sport, making immense personal sacrifices, often starting from a very young age. This mirrors the ancient Greek ideal of lifelong dedication and the pursuit of arete. The intense physical demands, the strict diets, the isolation from normal life. These are all direct parallels to the ancient training regimens we discussed. While modern science has brought us sophisticated nutrition and exercise physiology, the fundamental commitment required is timeless. And what about cheating? The ancient Zanes stand as stark reminders that the temptation to gain an unfair advantage is as old as competition itself. In the modern Olympics, this manifests as the constant battle against doping. Steroids, growth hormones, blood doping. These are the modern equivalents of ancient concoctions and magical curses designed to push the body beyond its natural limits. The World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, is constantly playing a cat-and-mouse game with athletes and trainers seeking illicit edges, just as the Hellenodikai struggled to maintain fairness in their time. The public shaming of a positive doping test, the stripping of medals, the career ruin. It all echoes the public disgrace immortalized by the Zanes. The methods have changed, but the underlying human impulse and the severe consequences remain remarkably similar. The commercialization of the modern games, with their massive sponsorship deals and advertising campaigns, can also be seen as a twisted echo of ancient patronage. Wealthy individuals and city-states once funded athletes for glory and prestige. Today, corporations pour billions into the Olympics, seeking brand recognition and association with athletic excellence. The athlete, once a representative of their polis, is now often a walking billboard for multinational companies. The financial stakes have magnified exponentially, but the principle of using athletic prowess for economic and social gain is centuries old. Even the ideals of gender and inclusion have a surprising historical resonance. While the modern Olympics strive for gender equality, with women competing in virtually all sports, the ancient games, with their strict exclusion of married women, highlight the long, arduous journey towards this modern ideal. The very existence of the ancient Heraean Games, however, limited shows that the seed of female athletic competition was there a distant ancestor to the powerful female athletes you see today dominating the podium. The struggle for equal participation is a modern battle, but its roots stretch back to those ancient distinctions. The spirit of intense rivalry, sometimes bordering on outright animosity between competing nations or individual athletes, is also a direct carryover. While we no longer have physical violence between city-states during the truce, the psychological warfare, the nationalistic fervor, and the desire to dominate rival countries are palpable. The fierce competition, the tears of joy and despair, the narratives of heroes and villains, these are universal elements of sport deeply rooted in the primal human drive to compete and conquer, just as they were in ancient Olympia. Consider the human cost. For all the glamour, modern athletes still face immense physical and psychological pressures. Career-ending injuries are common, the mental health toll of extreme competition is increasingly recognized, and the pursuit of perfection can lead to burnout. While medical care is vastly superior, the underlying sacrifice and the potential for long-term physical and mental consequences remain. The ancient tales of broken bodies and shattered dreams find their modern counterparts in athletes pushed to their limits, sometimes beyond. The role of technology, while seemingly a modern invention, has its own ancient echo. The ancient Greeks for their time utilized the best available technology in their training and competition, from meticulously crafted javelins and discus to the design of the stadium itself. Today, advanced materials, sports science, and digital analysis are integral. The human desire to optimize performance through innovation is timeless. Even the scandals, the political controversies, and the debates surrounding the fairness of judging or the ethics of certain practices can be traced back to Olympia. The Zanes statues are a testament to ancient scandals, and accusations of bias among the Hellenodikai were not unheard of. The modern Olympics, for all their sophistication, are still human endeavors prone to human flaws, ambition, and corruption. The more things change, the more they stay the same, especially when immense stakes are involved. So, as you slowly drift away from the ancient world, recognize that the modern Olympics are not just a contemporary invention. They are a living legacy deeply imprinted with the enduring, sometimes disturbing secrets of their ancient origins. The pursuit of excellence, the allure of glory, the relentless competition, the constant battle against cheating, and the profound human drama, these are threads that connect every athlete, every spectator across millennia. The echoes of Olympia are all around us in every cheer, every medal, and every whispered hope for victory.